You reach for your phone to look something up and nothing happens. Not because it's broken, because the internet was never invented. Not today, not ever. No websites, no email, no social media, no online anything for the entire history of human civilization from this point forward. What would that actually mean for how you live? At first, it sounds almost peaceful. No more doom scrolling, no more notifications, no more comparing your life to strangers online. Maybe people would read more, talk more, focus more. But the internet's disappearance isn't simply the removal of a distraction. It's the removal of the single largest information and coordination system human beings have ever built. And that system turns out to be quietly holding together far more of daily life than most people realize. To understand why this matters, you need to understand what the internet actually replaced, not just what it added. Historians of communication technology have found that before digital networks, information moved through slower, more localized systems: letters, phone calls, printed encyclopedias, physical libraries, word of mouth. These systems worked, but they worked at a fundamentally different speed and scale. Remove the internet, and you're not simply removing convenience. You're forcing an entire civilization to rebuild its relationship with information from a foundation that assumes finding an answer might take hours, days, or weeks, not seconds. Now imagine what your first internet-less morning would actually feel like. You wake up, and there's no weather app, so you look outside or listen to a radio broadcast, if radio even developed the same way without the internet's influence on media consumption. You want to know if a store is open, so you either remember its hours or you call and hope someone answers. Every small question that currently takes 5 seconds to resolve now requires planning, patience, or simply not knowing the answer at all. Researchers who study decision-making under uncertainty have found that constant access to information actually changes how people think, making them more comfortable delaying decisions until they can verify details, rather than relying on memory, judgment, or asking another person directly. Here's where the science gets genuinely interesting. Cognitive researchers who study memory and technology have found evidence of what's sometimes called the Google effect, a tendency for people to remember where to find information rather than the information itself, once they know it's easily searchable. Without the internet, this effect would never have developed. Human memory and reference habits would have evolved along a completely different path, likely retaining far more detailed knowledge internally, the way earlier generations memorized phone numbers, historical facts, and directions that today most people would simply look up. Now, scale this up to something bigger: how you'd actually meet people and form relationships. Right now, a significant portion of relationships, friendships, professional connections, and romantic partnerships begin at least partly through online platforms. Sociologists who study relationship formation have found that as internet use grew, the ways people met romantic partners shifted dramatically away from traditional channels like family introductions or shared community spaces toward online platforms specifically. Without the internet, that entire pathway simply wouldn't exist. Every relationship in your life would need to form through physical proximity, existing social circles, or chance encounters, dramatically narrowing the pool of people you'd ever realistically have the chance to meet. This is where the twist comes in. You might expect a world without the internet to have deeper, more meaningful relationships, since people would rely more on physical presence and less on digital interaction. But researchers who study social capital have found that online platforms, despite legitimate criticisms, have also allowed people to maintain meaningful connections across distances that would previously have simply faded away: old friends, extended family, former colleagues. Remove the internet, and many of those relationships wouldn't become deeper. They'd simply disappear from your life entirely once physical distance made maintaining them inconvenient. Think about what this means for something as fundamental as your career. Right now, an enormous number of jobs are built entirely around internet infrastructure: remote work, e-commerce, digital marketing, software development, online education. Economists who study labor markets note that the internet didn't just create new tools within existing industries. It created entirely new categories of employment that simply couldn't exist without a global digital network. Without the internet, none of these career paths would have ever formed. The entire shape of the modern job market and the skills considered valuable within it would be almost unrecognizable compared to today. Now widen the lens to something even bigger. What if this absence applied not just to your personal life, but to how entire societies function? Global commerce would look completely different. Right now, small businesses routinely reach customers across the world through online marketplaces, something historically available only to companies large enough to build international distribution networks. Economists who study small business growth have found that internet access has significantly expanded the ability of small independent sellers to compete in markets that used to be dominated exclusively by large companies with the resources for global distribution. Without the internet, commerce would remain far more geographically limited, concentrating economic opportunity even more heavily in the hands of large established corporations. Access to information itself would become dramatically more unequal. Right now, someone in a remote area with limited local resources can still access much of the same information as someone in a major city, assuming they have an internet connection. Researchers who study educational access have found that internet connectivity has meaningfully narrowed certain information and learning gaps between geographically isolated communities and urban centers. Without it, your access to knowledge, education, and opportunity would depend far more heavily on your physical proximity to libraries, universities, and information-rich institutions, recreating exactly the kind of geographic inequality that existed for most of human history. Here's the twist most people don't expect. A world without the internet would not necessarily be a more trustworthy or better informed world, even without the internet's well-documented problems with misinformation. Media historians who study the pre-digital era have found that misinformation, propaganda, and rumor spread effectively through traditional media and word of mouth long before the internet existed, often taking longer to correct precisely because there were fewer channels to challenge false claims quickly. Removing the internet wouldn't eliminate humanity's vulnerability to bad information. It would just slow down both the spread of falsehoods and the tools currently used to fact-check and correct them. Let's slow down and look at the mechanics of this a little closer, because different kinds of information would be affected in very different ways. Consider medicine specifically. Right now, doctors routinely consult online medical databases, cross-reference drug interactions instantly, and access the latest research within seconds of it being published anywhere in the world. Medical researchers who study clinical decision-making have found that rapid access to updated medical information measurably improves diagnostic accuracy and reduces preventable errors. Without the internet, doctors would rely far more heavily on printed medical journals that could take months to reach smaller hospitals, memorized knowledge from years-old textbooks, and slower professional networks for consulting specialists. Certain rare diagnoses, currently identifiable within minutes through an online search, might take years longer to correctly identify in some cases, simply because the specific pattern wasn't yet in wide enough circulation among the physicians who happen to encounter it. Now think about something surprisingly personal: how you'd actually navigate an unfamiliar city. Right now, a phone with a map application means you're rarely truly lost anywhere with cell service. Urban researchers who study wayfinding have found that reliance on digital navigation has measurably changed how people build internal mental maps of their environments, with heavier map app users generally forming weaker spatial memory of routes they've traveled many times. Without the internet, you'd need to rely on paper maps, asking strangers for directions, or simply learning your city the way previous generations did, slowly, through repeated physical experience. You'd likely develop a much stronger internal sense of direction, but you'd also get lost far more often in the process of building it. Now consider something even bigger: how scientific research itself would develop. Right now, researchers across the world can instantly share data, collaborate on papers in real time, and access decades of previously published research from a single search. Science historians who study collaborative research note that the internet dramatically accelerated the pace of scientific discovery, specifically by reducing the time between a finding being published and other researchers building on it elsewhere. Without the internet, scientific progress wouldn't stop, but it would almost certainly move significantly slower, with breakthroughs in one country sometimes taking years longer to reach and influence researchers working on similar problems elsewhere. Now, widen the lens one more time, back to something deeply personal: how you'd actually experience a crisis, a natural disaster, a missing family member, a sudden emergency far from home. Right now, information during a crisis spreads within minutes. Emergency alerts, real-time updates, ways to check on loved ones almost instantly. Disaster communication researchers have found that rapid information access during emergencies significantly improves both individual safety decisions and the speed of coordinated emergency response. Without the internet, that same crisis might unfold in near silence for hours or days. Family members unable to confirm each other's safety, communities unaware of unfolding danger until it directly reached them. Relief efforts coordinated through far slower channels that historically meant help arrived considerably later than it does today. So, what if the internet had never been invented? You would not simply be trading constant notifications for peaceful, focused living. You would be losing the primary infrastructure connecting billions of people to information, opportunity, and each other, replacing it with a world where knowledge, relationships, and economic opportunity remained far more tightly bound to geography, wealth, and existing social position than they are today. Maybe the internet was never really about convenience at all. Maybe it was always about closing the enormous gap between what humans know collectively and what any single person in any single place actually has access to.